Thoughts on the Clemson Spring game, Cade Klubnik, Peyton Strecko, Bryant Wesco, Jamal Anderson, and many, many more. We'll talk about it right here on The Morgan Thomas Show.
Looks like it's morphin' time.
This is my house. I built this. This is my house, and this will always be my house. Now let's continue.
Because I love me some me. I love me some me. To be the man, you gotta beat the man.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning.
And now, The Morgan Thomas Show.
Welcome back in, Tiger fans, to The Morgan Thomas Show. Before we get started on anything, I want to make sure that you like this video if you haven't already liked the video, and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can stay up to date on all of my exclusive Clemson content I put out every single week. And I know it's been quite some time since we've been together. I haven't had a YouTube video or a podcast, really a podcast in years. I haven't had a YouTube video in quite some time. But I really have been wanting to get back into it. I've been kind of just resetting the batteries, if you will, and kind of recharging everything, resetting the computer, recharging the battery, and things got busy. You know, I've got a regular job. I've got the radio show with 105.5 The Roar. And then my daughter, you know, I always talk about her 10 and under softball team that she's getting into. So I coach that. So I got a lot of things going on, but I have always wanted to get back into the show because, you know, hey, we've been running this show on Facebook, YouTube for 5 years now, some of it with me by myself, some of it with Big Al, some of it with Houston. Those guys I'm sure will be back in, but I wanted to get it started really for myself because this is something that I really enjoy doing, and it's a hobby of mine, and I'm going to try to be more consistent for you now following the spring game going forward. Now, I know we've missed a lot of stuff. We missed the Clemson basketball team and their great run into the Elite Eight, and I'll talk a little bit about that too, but mainly this show will start it off, kicking off about the Clemson spring game. I want to tell you some of my thoughts, look at some of the main storylines and reaction from that game, because I think there's a lot going on. Some people will tell me, Morgan, you're overreacting. It's too soon. It's just a spring game. And some people will say, hey, I agree with you. And, you know, this is a concern that needs to be addressed. Either way, though, I think both are exciting to talk about because, hey, this is why I'm here, to have a discussion, right? I hate people who are like, oh, you know, you shouldn't talk about this, or this is a non-story. No. Everything about Clemson is a story because, you know, I do a podcast. So everything's about Clemson is a story for me, whether you think so or not. But I'm going to love to talk about it, get back into it. I did a live stream, okay? I did the live stream during the game. I did a watch party, if you will, and had about 125 people watching. And you know how I am, man. The minute I see that and I get the great response that I did from everybody that tuned in, I said, hey, you know what I got to do? I got to get into this, and I got to get my show back on because there are people out there that I miss talking to and interacting with in the chat room, and I miss doing the videos myself. So without further discussion on this, I wanted to kind of get into the Clemson spring game. And my idea is to do about, I don't know, 25 minutes. You know how I am. I'm gonna probably go over that. But my idea is somewhere around 25 minutes of discussion on the spring game, and then again we'll get your comments in there. I'll try to go into YouTube if I have time to even cut it up. So you know how I like to do each topic as well. So you have two ways you can view it. You can try to view the whole podcast, or you can go onto YouTube and just look up like different highlights, right? So let's start off with the spring game itself and that group of people out there that are going to tell me, you know, Morgan, it's just the spring game. It doesn't matter. They didn't have full rosters, and you know how Dabo Swinney does things. He splits things up. And so the teams don't have the full arsenal. And the Clemson spring game didn't really give us a good picture of the offense in general. Cade Klubnik, you know, didn't really have a very good game. They didn't really seem to have anything going with the running game as well, outside of a preferred walk-on, which is Peyton Strecko, which I actually really like because he was extremely explosive off the handoff. That was my first tweet during the game, was how explosive he was once he took the handoff from the quarterback. You really can't teach that, and it's such a cheat code in football because you're hitting the hole and getting into the opening quicker than anyone else. And honestly, from what I'm seeing so far, he seems to be, even though he's not a scholarship player right now, he seems to be the only running back that we've seen hit the hole that quickly. Now, there could be other guys we didn't see, Phil Maffa, but we know Phil Maffa's not necessarily like that Travis Etienne, type hit the hole explosiveness. We know that Phil Maffa's not that. He's more of he gets it and he kind of pounds it in there, right? We even didn't feel like Will Shipley was that way either. He kind of took a little bit to get going. Strecko seems to be that guy who can kind of like hit the hole quickly and be very explosive. So I actually like what I saw from him. And but going back to the thought about the spring game and it doesn't matter. I think you're probably right there. There's probably a lot of overreactions from what Cade Klubnik did, from what the running game did, from what the offensive line did, and then vice versa, how successful the defense was. There's probably some overreaction there and some things that just really don't matter. Again, it goes back to the fact that you didn't have Tyler Brown, you didn't have Phil Maffa, and you didn't have Jake Brenningstool. But Cade Klubnik did have guys that I felt like were people who could make plays for him. He had Bryant Wesco. He had Antonio Williams. He had Olsen Pat Henry, who dropped a couple, right? But so I think that he had, for the most part, the first team offensive line as well. I think on his side of the ball, he had Ryan Linthicum originally, and then it turned into Harris Sewell. He had Tristan Lee and Marcus Tate and I believe Colin Sadler and Blake Miller. So, I mean, if you say, well, he didn't have a full offensive line, I mean, I think, honestly, he probably did. Now, if you say he didn't have the best wide receivers, well, he had Bryant Wesco, 5-star true freshman, and he had Antonio Williams, who before last year was the go-to guy. Injuries last year hurt him. So I see it both ways. I think, one, you definitely don't want to overreact in the spring. But two, we've seen this type of spring game for years, where they split up guys. Now, he does it, honestly, Dabo does it better this year and the past couple of years than he ever has. He used to just kind of straight up split the team, and it was not fun. But there were prior spring games that had explosive offenses. And Clemson had a glimpse of that where they were able to give protection to Cade Klubnik, and he was able to hit Adam Randall for a 55-yard pass. So they're there in some ways, but it definitely seemed like there's still a lot of work to do to get everybody on the same page and to get confidence around the offense. So what would I say? Would I say, is there room for improvement? Of course, across the board, there's room for improvement. I'm sure even on the defensive side of the ball, even though it seemed like they were amazing, there's room for improvement. I mean, hey, there's a couple of holding penalties, I think, against Khalil Barnes that, deserves some discussion and room for improvement, right? So here's my thing, and I tweeted this during the game. I think actually maybe after the game, but my suggestion and my thought has always been for the spring game to be more like an all-star game. I want the spring game to be kind of cheating towards the offense. I want it to give the offense a little bit more of an advantage because, okay, here's my real reason. One, the defense has seen this offense in practices and scrimmages multiple times. They've seen similar plays. They've seen players line up in certain formations. They've seen typically where Cade Klubnik likes to throw the ball in different formations. The defense on Clemson's side is not going to get surprised by much. The offense is not going to have the element of surprise, even in more than likely even like play action type things, unless you start going into the deep of the playbook. which you don't really want to do in a spring game, the defense is going to have a huge advantage over knowing what some of the vanilla plays are and knowing where Cade Klubnik likes to go in those type of vanilla plays. So the defense, to me, is always going to be at an advantage in a spring game or a scrimmage of where you've played multiple scrimmages already. I think it's with any kind of teams. You start to know, hey, who is your best player in this scenario, in that scenario, and the defense, to me, benefits greatly from that. So, one, it's hard enough to just beat that. Two, what does Clemson need the most? Does Clemson need to go into 2024 with this huge confidence on defense, or do they need to find a lot of confidence on offense more? Which one is more to me? To me, they need to find and achieve success, find confidence and achieve success on the offensive side of the ball much more than they do on the defensive side of the ball. Now, I'm not saying you want to just be terrible on defense, but why not call a couple of plays where it's cover zero or where you're putting the defense in a disadvantage, right? Why not put it where you maybe call the wrong scheme or you call something different on purpose to see how the defense reacts in being in the wrong setup, because it's going to happen in a game where you call the wrong type of play for that. And, some people say, well, Morgan, they're just going to go into cover 3 the entire time. Cover 3, cover 4, whatever. Or, cover 2, man under, right? And to me, those types of things are going to be not good for Clemson's offense. I think that maybe in a scenario where they're going to go deep, you call a cover 1. You only have one guy back. Maybe in a scenario where they're it's a passing down, you blitz a little too much or more than you thought you would, right? More than you would in a normal scenario. And maybe they did do this. And if they did put themselves in kind of an odd situation on defense and the offense still didn't succeed, well, then that would bring more concern for me as well. I'd be curious to see what you think in the comments on that. Do you think the defense tried different things, or did they play it pretty conservative, and really not give a much opening for the offense? Because to me, if I'm the coach, I'm telling Wes Goodwin, hey, on this play, we're running this play. I want you to call something that doesn't match with that. One, to see how the defense can respond and see if they can win even in a bad call. 2, to see if the offense can take advantage of some sort of play calling mistake, because it's going to happen in a game. And also, if Clemson has big plays, maybe what if Clemson finished that game with 3 or 4 50-yard plays? Yeah, you might be like, well, the defense, are kind of suspect. That secondary kind of suspect. But you also, on the other side, may be like, hey, Cade Klubnik is starting to figure it out. The offense seems to have a spark now. Unfortunately, even though it's just the spring game, and again, I'm going back to it's just the spring game, so I'm not going to overreact here. I don't think it's the end of the season and, they're going to go 0-12. And there's a lot to be said about the spring game just being a scrimmage and just relax, right? But, you walk away from that game, and what is the storyline right now? The storyline is Cade Klubnik doesn't look any better. The offensive line doesn't look any better. There's no real running game pulse right now. And Trent Pierman, your third-string quarterback, is the guy that showed out the most. Now, again, Trent Pierman gets the benefit of Dabo Swinney crazy calls with two-hand touch. I think Dabo Swinney is the worst referee when it comes to two-hand touch. I've said this for years. I would say it to his face. I think he's a terrible two-hand touch referee. And I think some of his players were telling him that on Saturday. Sometimes he calls it a sack. Sometimes he lets it go. Trent Pierman's 49-yard rush for a touchdown, which was a lot of the total yards they got that game. Was that even possible? I don't know. In a real game, It's hard to say. Trent Pierman, that's his style, though. He is a scrambling type quarterback, and he brings an added depth into that. Now, in the scrimmages that I have seen prior to the spring game with him in it, he's been overly scrambling. You know, I really haven't seen much of him as a quarterback until the spring game, which I was actually pretty excited to see. I mean, he was the one that made that throw to Bryant Wesco. I was excited to see him make quarterback plays, because most of the time I saw him as just a scrambling guy. Now, we know he's a gamer. We know he's won multiple state championships at D.W. Daniel High School. We know he's, Gatorade player of the state or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he is, but he had 141 yards passing, 62 yards rushing. And again, was kind of the star quarterback of the day. Now, is that really what you wanted from the spring game? Now, it's cool. It's a fun story. Now there's a lot to talk about. Is Trent Pierman fighting for a starting position? Is he better than the second string guy? I don't know. I think that, one, a lot of that probably is overreaction. They see them much more than we see them. But there's also that lingering thought. Hey, when the game gets played, who's the gamer? Who's winning the game? Cade Klubnik didn't throw a touchdown. Cade Klubnik had one interception and could, in my opinion, have had 3 interceptions. He had 2. I believe it was either Vizina. Maybe it was Vizina had 1 called back. But Cade Klubnik had 2 that was in traffic that were dropped. So when you look back, Klubnik went 13 of 26 for 158 yards and, had a big pass play, 55 yards to Adam Randall. So there were some positives from him. I think that he stayed in the pocket a few times, longer than I thought he would have last year. I think that Cade Klubnik, again, scanned the field pretty well. It seemed like he was trying for things a little bit further back, and he wasn't just immediately going to a check down or the easy out. And that's what Cade has to do. Cade has to push the envelope. Cade has to find the unfindable receivers, right? Because it's not always wide open guys. You have to find the guys that are barely wide open or that are in that one-on-one that you have faith that could win the one-on-one. But again, even with what he had, he didn't have his entire arsenal. So I would be curious to see how he does with his entire arsenal. But it's not understated to me that, and I don't want to understate to you, that I can see where people are concerned by the fact that he hasn't really, he didn't really have a great spring game. If it was me, I would have manipulated the game. And I know this is controversial, I guess, but this is a fantasy world anyways, where it's me as a coach. I would have made some sort of plays to where he would have had success for sure. That's just my thoughts. I'd love to get your thoughts on. That's overall thoughts. Spring game, Trent Pierman, Cade Klubnik. If you want to ask me the question, I know you're going to ask me the question, is Trent Pierman the starting quarterback? No. Cade Klubnik is your starting quarterback until, really he's going to have to lose a real game he's going to have to lose a couple of real games in order to be not the starting quarterback. He already lost, 4 games last year. So, we've seen a tolerance level for losing with Cade Klubnik. And I think that's fair. I don't think anybody can be perfect, and I think now in the expanded playoffs, there may even be more tolerance there. But as a team with the defense that they seem like they have and some of the pieces that they've added, I think this year is a year where if you don't make it to the playoffs, it's probably not a good year for you. It's probably another very frustrating year if you don't make it to the playoffs. Even though there's a controversy that, there are not going to be 2 ACC teams in the playoffs, we'll have to wait and see. But Clemson needs to be fighting for the ACC championship game, and they need to be fighting for a playoff position. selection. Now let's talk about some more positive things. You got Jamal Anderson, who the night before the game said, according to some reports, that he said he was going to have a pick six. And he intercepted Christopher Vizina and returned it for a 24-yard touchdown and gave some momentum. Not only that, afterwards, his dad played for the Falcons, and Dabo had him hit the Dirty Bird celebration. So Anderson's a guy who's played a lot of times last year, and he's one of those guys who has been in the special teams a ton. But now seeing him at a linebacker position and making big plays, because I believe he had another interception as well that was called back because of an offsides, which was, to me, not an offsides by Jaheim Lawson. I think that one guy you got to be extremely excited about is Jamal Anderson and how he performed. I put a list out of players and who I think were halftime stars. On the defense, I had Jamal Anderson, I had Jaheim Lawson, T.J. Parker, Sammy Brown, Tavoy Fagan, A.J. Hoffler, Jaden Lucas. You're seeing defensive ends. You're seeing linebackers. You're seeing cornerbacks that were showing out in the spring game. And I think as a Clemson fan, you have to think going into the season that Clemson now has one of the best defenses in the country. I think walking away from that game, Wes Goodwin has to be on cloud nine right now. He has to be extremely, extremely excited for what will come in 2024, because he has set his team up for success with the additions that he's added to this roster, with the development that he's made to these players that were freshmen last year, and weaknesses, or what we perceived as weaknesses, seem to be right back again to strengths. The defensive line looked great. The defensive ends looked great. Zaire Patterson looks like he's added a ton of muscle. A.J. Hoffler looks great again. And then behind them, even without Barrett Carter in pads, you had Sammy Brown and you had Jamal Anderson, and even, I think, a couple of good plays from D. Creighton in there, and it was exciting to watch. So the defense on my side, my thoughts is that they performed extremely well. Now, you could say that the other side of it for the offense, made them look great. We can go into that debate for sure, but let's just talk about the positives here. I want to throw in another name, DeMonte Capehart on the inside. One of my good friends, Chandler, he constantly tells me how he loves DeMonte Capehart. And this could be the year for DeMonte Capehart. I think a guy like that who's waited his time, he's the type of guy that just is ready to explode into a bigger role and onto the national stage. Cade Dinoff, I don't want to forget about him as well. He's a guy who was coming off the edge along with Jaheim Lawson, and were disrupting plays almost every single down that they were in. So, again, you look back at the defensive line and that linebacking core, the front seven, and then even the cornerbacks as well. I don't have a lot of notes for safeties. That's the only thing I would say on the defensive side of the ball. I have no players listed from safeties. I actually have Khalil Barnes with a couple of dings because of some holding and pass interference things that I saw. But cornerbacks, when you're losing cornerbacks, this is great news for Clemson. Defensive ends, when you've lost defensive ends, this is great news for Clemson. Linebackers, when you've lost your middle linebacker, great news for Clemson. So on the defensive side of the ball, plug and play, the new guys are coming in and they're performing at a level where it's making your eyebrows raise. That's for sure. So I like what I see from the defense. I think you probably do too. Let me know in the comments if there was any player that I missed on that list, because I definitely like this group of defensive guys that we've seen. I want to talk about the big star Bryant Wesco as well. Wesco wasted no time making a big impact and showcasing his talent. He had 3 receptions for 26 yards and had a highlight reel touchdown over the shoulder grab, and in really tight coverage from Austin Randall, Adam Randall's older brother, who was a transfer. Dabo Sweeney praised him after the game. He's a former top recruit, 6'2", 170 pounds, give or take. You can tell he still has need to undergo physical development and get a little bit stronger, a little bit bigger, but he is a true freshman, and he does have some God-given talent that you just can't ignore. And I truly believe that regardless of the situation, even in a negative situation where teams are scrambled up a little bit, the playmakers, the stars, they show up. You know, if you mix and match teams up, eventually the stars will show their faces. When a player shows you who they are, believe them. That's what I told somebody. Somebody said, hey, this person or that person, I'm not going to say the person, you can go find it on X. This person, that person, they're going to be 70% better in August. And I said, okay. I said, when a player shows you who they are, game after game after game, when a player shows you who they are, believe them. Because if you feel like that this player is going to do this for 12 games and then all of a sudden in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium against Georgia become 70% better or 70 times better, I say, you know, I will apologize if that happens, but more often than not, that kind of stuff doesn't happen. When a player shows you what they can do and who they are, that's who they are. It's not, they just can't like become Michael Jordan tomorrow. You know, we like to think that kind of development is possible. And that's why I ask people, can this person improve 20%, 30%? It's kind of hard to improve 20, 30%. It's hard to improve 10%. Ask a business owner. So we're looking at Bryant Wesco, and 6'2", 170 pounds, a lot of hype around him. And I think it was great to get him with Cade Klubnik. It's obvious, it's clear that Clemson wants to get those two guys on the same page quickly and have them develop a relationship on the field to where they can get their timing down, their route running down, get their confidence together. I think more to come with Bryant Wesco. You walk away from that game with excitement. You walk away from that game with confidence in Bryant Wesco and what he can do. And I would love to get your thoughts on him. Are we still putting too much pressure on him? Do you feel like that he's going to have a great season? If you think he's going to have a great season, I'd like to know what the total amount of receiving yards you think he will have. Because when you look at last year, a freshman who's getting 700, 800 yards, I think that's pretty uncommon. The guy from NC State, Concepcion, I think he had 700 maybe, and he was one of the best freshmen out there. So you're not going to get, most people that are freshmen are not going to be above 500 yards. So do you think he's going to get 500 yards? Do you think he's going to get 400? Maybe 600? Maybe he's going to be an outlier and 600, 700? Maybe he's going to jump on the scene? I'd like to know what you think a realistic expectation is for his receiving yards. And we can continue to go into that debate as well because, you know, I think it's a good discussion. All right, Tiger fans, we have covered some of my initial thoughts from the spring game, my thoughts on Trent Pierman and Cade Klubnik and the quarterback battle that's going on right now coming out of the spring game, talked about some of the stars that I saw on the defensive side of the ball, and we kind of chatted a little bit at the end here about Bryant Wesco. Since we're at our about 30-minute mark or so, I'm going to end this video, end this podcast for you. I'm going to try to load it up on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts as well, so you can listen to it if you want to listen or watch it if you want to watch. I appreciate you tuning in. My idea is that we'll do this more and more as I can get back into the rhythm and continue to do what I love to do, which is discuss Clemson football with you. So thank you again for tuning in. Hey, if you haven't already, I want to remind you, like the video if you haven't liked the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and so you can stay up to date on all of the videos that I'm going to put out in the 2024 season. season. I look forward to getting back in the rhythm with you and discussing Clemson football. And as always, Tiger fans, we'll see you at the top of the hill.